Thomas Reed stopped his hand on a
Hargrave.
band of paper where a name should have been. The page had been rubbed hard enough that the fibers were fuzzy, the ink smeared into a pale shadow, and the ledger carried a blank space flanked by tidy, complete lines. Suspicion tightened his jaw. He felt it as a pull between his ribs and the brass watch in his waistcoat. He reached for the blotting cloth, pressed it against the paper, and found a faint oval of ink residue where a surname had once sat. The concrete fact sat before him. An entry had been removed from the census, not by accident, but by intention. He did not look up when the door opened. He kept his hand on the ledger and let the light from the lamp fall on the empty place. Thomas had counted men and women this parish winter after winter. He knew the numbers by the shape of their signatures and the way a farming household abbreviated their ages. His work was to make presence official. Now presence had been made absent on purpose. Within the next 3 minutes a confrontation arrived with the weight of policy and the hush of authority. "Mr. Reed," said a voice in the doorway. "Close the ledgers tonight." Thomas waited before he answered. He could feel suspicion shift toward doubt, the first small tremor of an emotion that would govern his choices tonight. He found his spectacles with 2 fingers, set them low on his nose, and let his eyes narrow on the doorway. "Cartwright, Thomas. Why would I close them?" Meh. Cartwright's coat was a darker brown than the clerk's waistcoats and smelled faintly of stable oil. He stood framed in the doorway with his hat still in his hands. His face was plain. His tone was not. He stepped over the threshold and set one heavy boot on the parquet like a metronome marking the bounds of the office. "You know the practice, Thomas Cartwright. We do not reopen prior returns. We do not question instructions from the registrar." Thomas felt uncertainty arrive like cold water along his forearms. Doubt moved into a harder, sharper shape when Cartwright placed a single folded slip of paper on the desk without looking at it. "Open it, Cartwright." Thomas did not lift the paper at once. He let his thumb rest on the edge of the page where the blank space still showed. The ledger's weight felt heavier than usual. He lifted the slip and unfolded plain paper, not official stationery, bearing a tiny stamped mark he did not recognize and a single initial in careful ink. The name had not simply vanished, it had been ordered out. That evening the registry's lamp burned low and the city beyond the window breathed coal smoke through the panes. Thomas felt his emotions shift again, doubt that became a quiet fear. The fear came with tightened fingers and a sudden, audible intake of breath when the office door opened for a visitor who would make the absence matter. Eleanor Hale arrived with her shawl pressed tight and her hands raw from walking. She did not know the ledger's pages. She knew her husband. "Thomas, has my husband been counted?" Thomas looked at her and then at the ledger. He turned the page to the parish entries and her name in his mind. He saw in his head the neat column where men's names had been entered with ages and occupations. He found the blank line again and told Eleanor what he had found. "He's not there, Thomas." Eleanor's mouth opened and closed. She ran a hand along the rim of her bonnet and then gripped the edge of Thomas' desk. "Not there," she said. "You must be mistaken, Eleanor. Thomas, I have the ledger." She pressed both palms flat on the wood. "Tell me where he is. Tell me if he is ill. Tell me if he..." Her sentences snapped and fell. Thomas had no comfort to offer. He had a ledger with a rubbed space and a slip with an initial. He had Cartwright's voice telling him to close the books. He had Jane Whitaker, the assistant, who worked with him among the stacks and who would not let him ignore patterns. They moved behind the tall cabinet where ledgers stood in rows. Thomas and Jane lights shifted over the spines, reading titles, parish numbers, dates. Jane's hands were quick and methodical. She placed 2 volumes together and rubbed them with a paper cloth, showing Thomas how the same faint erasures clustered in a set of entries tied to one parish district. "Look," Jane, pointing. "See how these are all faint along the same column." Thomas leaned close. He felt an internal friction. Suspicion to doubt to a growing certainty. The pattern was not random. The erased names were grouped by location and by a line of neat, imported strokes that did not match the local clerk's hands. They had been removed to hide something. They worked through the night. Every 3 books the pattern repeated. Every time Thomas traced the area where a name had been, he felt his resolve harden. He could not leave this alone. He found that his actions took on a steadier rhythm. His hand rested on the quill before he wrote, his fingers stained with ink. Around 2 in the morning, Constable Briggs came with a soft knock that carried official weight. He leaned his shoulder against the door and did not smile. "Mr. Reed, Briggs, orders arrived from above. Any queries?" Thomas kept his voice even. "Which orders?" Briggs folded his hands. "Adjustments were authorized. We are to comply. No difficulties." Jane glanced toward Briggs and then at Thomas, who from above, she asked. Briggs shrugged. "You know how that works, Jane." The conversation tightened Thomas's fear into a specific, actionable threat. His chest moved fast. He realized that the erasures were not clerical quirks but legal pressures, directions from people who could make trouble for a clerk who resisted. Briggs Thomas, who authorized these slips. Briggs tapped the flat of his palm against the ledger. "You will find the marks. You know how to follow the pattern." Thomas's hands moved while his thoughts tried to keep pace. He slid open the locked drawer at the edge of his desk where he kept old correspondence. He had a small brass key on a cord. The drawer smelled of old paper and candle grease. He found a folded slip tucked behind an envelope that bore the registrar's crest. The slip's initial matched the mark he had unfolded earlier. The name of a wealthy household was implied in the shortened. The reveal changed Thomas' understanding, as if someone had flatly told him the reason for the blank lines. The motive shifted. This was protection for influence, not protection for proper record-keeping. He read the slip twice. His emotions shifted to anger edged with caution. He could feel the outrage in his hands. He wanted to tear the paper and pin it on Cartwright's coat. Instead he folded the slip, set it back in the drawer, and closed it with a care that hid tremor. "Thomas," Jane softly, "these aren't mistakes." "No," he replied, "they re-choices." A confrontation came on the first light of dawn. Under a single lamplight that had not yet been put out, Thomas placed the folded slip on the desk and turned to face Cartwright and Mies Alden, the registrar. The lamp made small pools on their faces and left the rest of the room in dimness where stacks of ledgers breathed dust into the air. "Mr. Cartwright, Mies Alden, Thomas, these slips instruct Erasure. Whose orders are these?" Cartwright answered without a change in tone. "The registrar issues policy, Mies." Alden's eyes were pale. She slid her glove off and set it on the desk. "We have to think of stability," she said. "You know the consequences of opening certain records. Is stability the reason a name disappears, Thomas? Is that justice?" Mies Alden's mouth hardened. "You are a clerk, Mr. Reed. You record what is given, you do not create trouble." Thomas felt his emotion shift again, this time from fear and doubt into resolve. His jaw set. He spoke with measured steps, each syllable deliberate. "Jane found a pattern," he said. "Constable Briggs' orders came from above. I found a slip with a mark tied to a household. That is not bookkeeping. That is concealment." Cartwright leaned forward. "We do not have to explain beyond the office. You have to explain it to Eleanor Hale, Thomas. Her husband's name is missing." Mies Alden's fingers tightened on the lamp's rim. "You risk legal exposure, Thomas." The argument moved fast. They exchanged short, cutting lines. Thomas pressed the slip onto the desk and watched each face. They argued about duty, about order, about safety. In the center of the small room, the ledger lay open like evidence. "Cartwright, Thomas, who benefits if a name vanishes?" Cartwright's reply was a list of neutral terms. "Influence. Estates, quiet settlement." Mies Alden, her voice leveled. "There are families who matter to the parish." Read Briggs quietly. "You could be made redundant by asking too many questions." 3 to 6 sharp exchanges passed between them, each line a small erosion of safety. Thomas felt his hands tremble and then steady. He spoke again, softer. "I will not remove a name I have recorded," he said. Jane placed her hand on the ledger where his did. Her presence was small and steady and acted as a witness. She had come multiple times to the stacks, looked at the ledgers, and pointed to patterns. Her action pushed Thomas' choice from solitary to shared. She had risked her position by helping him search. "Thomas, Jane, we can copy the entries. We can leave a trace." Eleanor waited in the foyer. She had not left. The registry's front window showed the first pale of dawn, and the street beyond with shutters closed. Her hands were knuckled white where she held her shawl. When Thomas stood firm, Alden stepped back into the shadows. Cartwright's shadow filled the doorway. He looked like a man who carried an instruction rather than a conscience. "You are making yourself foolish, Cartwright. You will force others to act to protect their own." Thomas's final answer arrived as a small, private act. He slid a clean sheet from his satchel, wrote the husband's name in his careful hand, and placed the paper where Eleanor could find it. He did not shout. He did not demand a declaration. He set down a single, precise correction in a place he controlled. Jane nodded when she saw the slip. "I'll keep a copy," she whispered. "We will at least have the record." The confrontation lost some of its immediate thunder after that small exchange, but the consequences did not end. Briggs left with a warning voice. Cartwright shut the door without another word. Mies. Alden listened to the lamp and the floorboards and left with the registrar's composure intact. Outside, the morning street smelled of coal and hot bread. Eleanor opened the folded paper with the steadiness of a person who had been taught to hold grief in her hands as a thing to manage. She read the name and then looked up as if expecting some change in the room to mirror the name's return. "Thank you," she said to Thomas in a voice that was too small to be called a relief. It was a word that did not fix the ledger or the order slips, but it called the name back into the light for a moment. Thomas felt two emotion shifts in that hour, suspicion to doubt, doubt to fear, and then fear to a practical resolve. Each shift showed in his hands the slow tap of his pen, the way he folded paper, the brief clench of his jaw when asked to yield. He had chosen not to erase. He had chosen to make a quiet correction. Those were small acts that changed how he would stand in the office. They did not change the system. After the visitors left and the room emptied, Thomas returned to the locked drawer. He slid the slip he had found back into its hiding place and left the drawer slightly ajar. He placed a thin pencil mark on the margin of a non-public page where only he and Jane might notice it, a discreet line, a small dot beside a date. It was a sign for Alina should she return, a sign that someone had tried. Jane barred her throat. "You could get fired," she said. "I know," Thomas replied. "But someone must say the names." He closed the ledger with deliberate care. The office filled with the ordinary sounds of morning. A cart on the street, a child calling for bread, the distant creak of a factory gate. Those sounds resumed the city's rhythm, indifferent to the ledger's blank spaces. Thomas walked out into the street with his satchel on his shoulder and his brass watch heavy against his side. He paused on the pavement and looked back at the registry's shuttered window. The lamp's pool of light had been replaced by day. He felt the registry's choices press on him like a weight and also like a taut cord to which he could now be held accountable. As he turned to go home, he left a final small action. He folded his coat tighter against the coal smoke and set his key on the desk, where Jane would find it if she needed access. He left his mark by leaving a trace for others. Eleanor walked away with the folded slip in her hand, and the hard work of searching still ahead. Jane returned to the stacks and began copying entries into a private notebook, the nib of her pen scratching a quiet record. Cartwright spoke to no one on his way out, and Ms. Alden went to the registrar's office with the ledger closed, but not entirely quieted. The chapter's immediate conflict, a name removed, a clerk's refusal to erase, and a pattern of suppression had resolved into small, concrete outcomes. A corrected slip given to a claimant, a hidden mark left for future checks, and the knowledge of where influence had shaped administrative actions. The tension settled but did not vanish. The ledger remained on Thomas's desk, its blank line a physical reminder of absence. He could not unlearn what he had seen. He could only choose the next small acts: copy, hide, protect, or yield. For now he had chosen to protect a single name and to leave a trace that might be followed. When he finally closed his shop door to walk home, the morning had opened fully and servants called keys at thresholds. Thomas tucked the brass key into his coat and felt its coolness. He stopped for a moment on the threshold, reached out and smoothed the ledger's cover with one careful hand, and then walked away with ink on his fingers and a ledger of quiet absences left behind. A municipal messenger flung a sealed bundle onto the registry table, and Registrar Hargrave snapped, "Leave it there," while Thomas Reed's hand stayed on the ledger. Suspicion tightened Thomas' jaw before he could name it. He felt that same tug he had felt weeks earlier when a page in the ledgers lay rubbed into a pale absence. The room smelled of coal smoke and wet wool. The bundle swatch seal had a crown pressed into it, and the brass edge caught the lamplight. Hargrave kept his voice flat and small. Thomas set the quill down slowly and let the silence lengthen until words were demanded. Thomas Reed had been a clerk long enough to count the weight of a silence. He placed his palm against the ledger, feeling the ink, stained grooves at his fingertips, the texture that told him a page had been handled too roughly to be an accident. He had stopped his hand once before on a blank band of paper. He had felt the same small, rising knot of doubt then. The office clock gave a single, tired tick. Hargrave, Registrar's orders. These names go unrecorded. Thomas looked from Hargrave to the sealed bundle. The problem, an instruction to erase people, was now a physical thing on the desk between them. That fact fixed his attention. Hargrave's mouth made a line. He pushed the bundle nearer with the toe of his boot. "There is a list," he said. "Take care, Thomas." The list is explicit. His words were not loud, but they carried a finality that left no room for argument. Thomas felt hesitation more than anger. He folded his fingers beneath the table and kept his eyes on the ledger's edge. Eleanor, the junior clerk, stood by the doorway with her scarf still on her shoulders. She kept her hands tucked into her sleeves. She had watched Thomas' hand halt over blank paper in the past. She watched it again now. "Hargrave, Mrs." Avery's voice burst through the doorway before anyone could stop it. "Why is my brother not on the public list?" She stood on the threshold, shawl loose and voice sharp. Her insistence converted policy into consequence at once. Hargrave did not look surprised. "Mrs. Avery," he said with a curt bow, "please step inside and speak calmly, Mrs." Avery stepped to the counter and tugged the ledger toward her as if she could pull a name back by force. Thomas saw her fingers tremble when they brushed the paper. He felt a small shift inside him, from suspicion to a prickling concern. He could see the ledger's blank band from the doorway and the way her knuckles whitened. This was not administrative theory. This was someone's brother. Eleanor moved forward. "Thomas, you saw it," she said. Her voice was low but steady. "You saw the page, Thomas." "I did." "There is a blank band here." He kept his tone measured. He did not say the word erased. Hargrave put his hand on the ledger and covered the blank band with his palm as if it could hide what the paper already refused to hold. "We have orders from higher, Hargrave," and he made a gesture at the messenger, who had folded his arms and refused to meet the clerk's eye. "It concerns public order and property." Nothing more for discussion tonight. Thomas' chest tightened in a way that made his fingers ache. Doubt moved into fear as he considered what hire meant for the men named in ink. Names that might be removed for reasons that had nothing to do with law. "Hargrave, Mrs. Avery." Nails on the ledger. "My brother died 3 weeks ago. He worked at the docks. He is Samuel Avery. He is not a danger to anyone." Her voice shook. Thomas watched Hargrave's expression change just a fraction. "Samuel Avery is on a list," Hargrave answered. "He appears on other lists. Not here." "Not now." The constable at the doorway, Constable Briggs, stepped forward then, boots creaking on the worn floorboard. "Registrar Hargrave," he said to Thomas. "We ask for compliance." The constable spoke to Thomas with a civil cadence, designed to intimidate through normality. Thomas heard the word compliance as if it were a bell. They moved to the ledger then. Eleanor and Thomas opened the worn volume on the table. Thomas felt the spine give beneath his hand. The pages smelled of old glue and pressed cloth. He slid his fingers between the leaves and found a folded slip tucked into the gutter, the kind of small, secret thing you only find when you search without appliances. The slip had names crossed out in a precise, almost clinical hand, an official seal stamped faintly at one corner. "Elena." These were done after the census was compiled. Her breath was short. "These are delistings." Thomas read one crossed name aloud, the syllables slow in the lamplight. His voice matched his internal motion, moving from doubt to an unsettling certainty. Hargrave moved to the hearth and warmed his hands by the small fire. He named a reason in a flat voice: public order, property claims. To prevent unrest, Constable Briggs, who had been standing near the door, answered from his place by the filing cabinet. "And the law backs that," he said. He tapped a leather folder with his knuckles. "We act on instruction." The tape of reasons tightened around the ledger like a band. Thomas felt pressure in his shoulders, then a tighter knot under his sternum. He swallowed, and his mouth tasted of ink. "You ask me to remove names." "Thomas." His voice did not waver this time. "Remove who, exactly?" He the question because he needed them to say it outright. Briggs named a surname at random, then another. The second name froze Thomas. He recognized it. A boy he had once shared bread with after a shift, a name that belonged to a family that had been kind to him when his rent was late. Thomas' hands went cold. The issue left theory and struck him personally. That was the second shift in his feelings: personal fear for a friend, then a thin, resolute anger. Hargrave leaned close and lowered his voice. "Thomas, the registrar cannot be seen to question instructions from above. You understand the implications." He paused. "This is not about you." Thomas looked down at his fingers and saw the ink embedded beneath his nails. He thought of the ledger in Chapter 1, where he had stopped his hand on a blank band and had felt that same pull. He had kept that memory on the inside of his palm like a small tolly. Now the tolly demanded a choice. The messenger on the other side of the desk shifted his weight, the bundle safe by his boot. "Eleanor, if we hide the names, we deny people a place in history." Her voice was quiet and raw. "We deny them official proof of their lives." Hargrave's jaw tightened. "We deny trouble," he said. "We prevent claims, riots, confusion." "This is order." Thomas felt the room tilt between two necessities: order and record. He did not accept the neat phrase. He had handled petitions where the absence of paper denied widows' pensions, and where a single omitted name meant no inheritance, no recognition in future ledgers. Practical consequences unrolled in his head like the thin slip they had found: missing pay, lost roofs, children denied schooling. The possible damage made him move. Thomas took a sheet of paper, copied the crossed names with careful hand and steady script. He folded the list tight and slipped it into the pocket of his waistcoat where the brass watch lay heavy. Eleanor watched him. "Thomas, what are you doing?" she asked. Her voice contained hope and fear in equal parts. He did not answer immediately. Hargrave's eyes narrowed. "Thomas, read." "Hargrave, you will not defy the registrar." "Hargrave," Thomas replied, "I will not strike my hand through a man's name if I can place it somewhere safe." He set the ledger closed with one smooth motion and felt the small tremor in his wrist betray the size of the stakes. The motion did not carry rhetoric, it carried intent. Briggs stepped toward Thomas, the constable bulk cutting off the lamplight from Thomas' face. "If you keep such a list, Briggs, you understand the consequences. You could be charged with obstruction." Thomas thought of the brass key at his neck, the leather satchel he had carried since his apprenticeship, the small comings and goings of his life that would unravel if he were judged a lawbreaker. Fear moved through him again, but the fear steadied into determination. He did not turn his back on the ledger. He met Briggs' gaze and held it. "I do understand," he said. There was a rapid exchange then, 3 quick lines, the kind the notes demanded in an argument. "Thomas, hand over any extra lists." Hargrave, "Thomas, you cannot keep records outside official channels." Briggs added, "Eleanor, do not encourage him." Hargrave ordered. Eleanor's reply was a single sentence: "I will not watch names disappear." The rapid back and forth tightened the air. Thomas felt the movement of the argument as a physical thing, a nudge, a shove, a closed door. He moved beneath it. Hargrave demanded the ledger and opened it. He thumbed through pages until he came upon the blank band. He passed his finger slowly across where a name should have been and did not speak. Thomas watched Hargrave's mouth crease, saw the registrar's hand tremble once as though the ledger's absence had reached him despite his decorum. Hargrave lifted his head and said, "We will inspect this ledger. We will make a note." He spoke with the careful cadence of procedure. He handed the ledger to Briggs for temporary custody. Briggs tucked it beneath his arm, the weight guaranteed now to leave the room. Thomas watched Briggs go. Each step took the ledger nearer to some official filing, further from the truth Thomas wished to preserve. When they had shuffled people back into the street, Thomas waited until the office emptied. He crossed to the worn floor beside the desk and pried up a loose board with the brass key he kept for his satchel. Eleanor had walked to the door and turned the key in the lock for him, her glance sharp and fierce. Mrs. Avery had left with Hargrave's thin promises and a face that would not be soothed by promises. Thomas slid the folded list beneath the floorboard and tamped the wood back into place. His hands shook while he worked. He felt a change in himself from passive clerk to a man carrying a secret ledger. A new steadiness settled into his shoulders when the board clicked home. He sat in the dark beside the desk and listened to the town outside. A cart's wheels, a distant shout, a dog barking twice. He breathed and felt his pulse slow. The immediate crisis eased, but not the unease. He had not told Eleanor everything. She had seen his hands, but she had not seen where he had hidden the paper. She had left with a look that promised quiet help if needed. Thomas unfolded his coat and checked the satchel where the brass watch lay. The watch ticked. He wound it with a thumb and felt the slight resistance. He had chosen preservation over compliance. That decision would demand small, careful actions in the days to come. At night, after he locked the office, Thomas went home along the lamp-lit streets with his coat collar up against coal smoke. He passed markets shutting and men drawing curtains. He kept his hands in his pockets and felt the weight of the folded list, there for a moment before shifting it to the lining of his waistcoat. He thought of the friend whose name Briggs had mentioned. He thought of the woman who had grabbed at the ledger. His chest felt tight, not with abstract dread but with the physical taste of having to keep a secret that would require regular, cautious maintenance. He planned small things, how he would check the list, when he would visit the friend, what cover stories he could give if anyone asked. The planning steadied him. The next day he arrived early and found a fresh stamped notice on the clerk's table. Hargrave had left an order to reconcile the ledger by the week's end. Thomas ran his finger along the edge of the paper and imagined the grooves where names might be rubbed out. He called Eleanor over and spoke in low sentences that required no flourish. "Eleanor, look after the ledger tonight. Keep it open as if we are midwork." She nodded and answered with a single line. "I will, Thomas." Her pace quickened when she spoke. She did not hide that she intended to help him. Their alliance felt like a silent instrument, tuned for a future action. Later that afternoon, Constable Briggs stopped by the registry to inspect records in person. He spoke to Thomas with a voice that mixed official courtesy and the thin threat of enforcement. "Thomas Reed," he said. "We will be watching the ledger's reconciliations closely." Thomas met his gaze and answered plainly, "Constable Briggs, the ledger is here for public record." The constable's eyes flicked to the ledger, to the hearth, to the small, low stool where Thomas kept his quill. He did not look for the fold in the charcoal lining of Thomas' waistcoat. Briggs had another attendance. He had become part of the process that would pressure Hargrave and Thomas to follow the directives. A week passed with small tests. Hargrave for nightly summaries. Briggs made a point of being on the street near the registry at closing time. Eleanor brought Thomas tea and small notes about families who had sent petitions. Mrs. Avery wrote another letter and left it with the doorkeeper. Each event pulled at Thomas like threads on a sweater. He had to keep them from unraveling. Each encounter moved his feelings. Suspicion settled into guarded courage, and guarded courage grew into a quiet stubbornness. He found himself speaking fewer words and counting facts instead. Who had been delisted, where they had lived, whether they had papers elsewhere. One afternoon, Thomas opened a file and found a note from an official he recognized by hand. The handwriting told him the writer's office. The note stated that certain entries were to be removed on grounds of state security. Thomas' breath caught and a new anger flared. State security, he realized, meant anything the higher officials chose to name. He crushed the paper in his hand for a moment and let that simple motion mark his resolve. Eleanor watched him and put a hand on the ledger as if to steady it. That touch was a promise. Thomas planned exact actions now. Copies, secret hiding places, and trusted people who might be told only when needed. At the chapter's peak, when Hargrave called for a full inspection and Briggs demanded an immediate audit, Thomas made his move. Hargrave and Briggs stood over him as he pretended to comply. He placed the ledger in Hargrave's hands deliberately. The registrar's fingers brushed the blank band and his face did not show the trouble Thomas knew it held. While they argued procedure, Thomas slid a folded copy of the omitted names into the lining of his coat with a careful movement practiced until it felt instinctive. He did not speak while he did it. He felt the paper warm in the fabric. Hargrave announced he would take the ledger to the municipal office for verification and left with Briggs. The office emptied. Thomas remained at his desk, hands flat on the wood, heartbeat measured. When the street was quiet and the registry dark, Thomas pried up the loose board and slid the copied names beneath it. He tamped the wood back in place and listened to the house settle. He felt the narrow, specific relief of an action made and a risk taken. He did not tell anyone where he had hidden the list. He did tell Eleanor only that he had kept copies. She nodded and left the registry with a quiet step that carried the possibility of help. Thomas locked the door, pocketed his brass key, and walked home under lamplight, the weight of the secret list pressing at his ribs like a small, constant object. Outside his small lodging a cart clattered, and someone shouted a direction. Thomas paused at his gate and breathed. The night's air was cold and smelled of the river. He thought of the ledger lying in official hands somewhere beyond the town and of the slip beneath his floorboard. He felt no triumph. He felt the careful steadiness of a man who had made a choice and who must now live with it. He turned the brass key in his pocket between thumb and forefinger and stepped inside. The house door closed behind him with a soft click that matched the floorboard in the registry. He sat at his narrow table, set his pocket watch on the wood, and listened to its ticking until the sound slowed and his eyes closed. Outside, the town carried on. Inside, a single hidden list rested beneath a board in a registry office, and Thomas Reed knew he would need to check it again and again. He had preserved names by a quiet, deliberate action. He had refused to let official procedure erase ordinary lives without a private counterweight. The chapter did not end with bold proclamations or dramatic arrests. It ended with a concrete act. Thomas slid the board back into place and pushed a small scrap of torn paper into the gap of wood so it would not rattle. He set his quill on the desk and wound his brass watch once more. The watch ticked and the ledger remained, for now, imperfect but not entirely empty. Thomas Reed caught Registrar Hargrave's hand closing a small folded bundle into the locked drawer. Suspicion tightened his jaw. He felt the same prick of unease he had felt weeks earlier when a page in the ledgers had been rubbed into a pale smear. He did not speak at once. He held his place at the ledger table, fingers resting on the worn leather spine, and watched Hargrave's wrist slide the parcel under the drawer lip. The conflict was immediate. A recorded duty on one side of the counter and an invisible pressure on the other. The central problem was clear within those first seconds. Names were being removed, and someone in the registry acted to hide how. He stepped forward before he could reason the hesitation away. Registrar Hargrave, Thomas. His voice was low. What is that? Hargrave's hand froze. He did not look at Thomas immediately. He thumbed the folded slips and gave a short, guarded sound. The municipal messenger, who had left a sealed bundle on the table an hour before, stood by the doorway, arms crossed, watching with a bored face. Leave it there, Hargrave. His words were brusque and practiced. Orders came with it. He moved to pull shut a ledger to cover the spot where the slips had been placed. Thomas reached for the drawer. He remembered a similar tug of fear in earlier weeks, the ledger page with a band of rubbed paper that had stopped his hand. That memory supplied method, not mere feeling. He set one palm down on the ledger and kept his other hand on the drawer edge. A tense exchange opened immediately. "Registrar Hargrave," Thomas repeated, fingers at the drawer. "I need to check those slips." He spoke the duty he knew well, accuracy. Ledger cross-reference, but his tone carried something harder now. Hargrave's eyes flicked to the brass key on the desk and then to the door. "They are not for you, Thomas. Those are orders from Town Hall. You do not touch them." The messenger made a small, impatient noise. "The carriage waits, Hargrave. We've not time for this." He tapped his boot heel once. Thomas felt a shift under his ribs. His suspicion cooled into a more deliberate defiance. He had spent years recording villagers' births and passings. He had learned the shape of proper entries, the way ink pooled on cheap paper, the tiny notations mothers used when they could not sign. He could not stand by while someone erased a line from that record. "Show me the bundle, Thomas." He kept his hand on the ledger as if the old book anchored him. Hargrave leaned over the drawer and shut it half. His voice narrowed. "You ask and I refuse. You try and you will lose more than a job, Thomas. We have counselors who will ensure you are moved to a quieter post. You understand the consequences." A pressure passed through the room. Thomas' throat went dry. Defiance tightened his fingers around the ledger. He pressed again for proof. "At least let me make a note of the reference," he said. A simple note. His words were a measured attempt to split compliance from concealment. Hargrave's reply was a clipped laugh. "The reference is in the bundle. The bundle is sealed. That's all you need know." A bell tinkled in the inner office. The door swung open, and a woman in a faded shawl stepped in. She carried a thin scrap of paper folded in a manner that suggested it had been consulted many times. Her face had been pounded by worry. She was Mrs. Larkin. "Registrar, please. Mrs. Larkin," her voice breaking into the room. "My son's birth slip, where is it? The reference you gave me leads nowhere. I have come twice and the clerk sent me away." She pushed the scrap forward on the counter so Thomas could see the neat, crowded handwriting. Hargrave waved a hand. "Madam, we are closed to new inquiries tonight. Come back in the morning. That will be easier for everyone." He spoke with the hospital politeness of a man who wanted the scene to end. Mrs. Larkin's eyes found Thomas and she said his name. "Thomas Reed, you wrote mine down once. You remember me. Please, my name is Larkin. My boy is Henry. Tell me where he is in the register." Her voice trembled in a way that made the messenger's impatience look crude. Thomas checked the ledger reference on her scrap. He felt the old shock of recognition. This was not the first time he had traced a missing index to a rubbed band of paper. He thought of the earlier ledger where a name hung in a blank, and of the sealed bundle Hargrave had put away. An uneasy shift moved through him. Suspicion to anger to a cold, practical resolve. "Hargrave, Thomas, show me the ledger index." "I will look at the referenced folio." He did not dare ask for the bundle again, not with the messenger listening, but he insisted on the public record. Hargrave closed his mouth and a few lines of light passed between his lips. He slid to the side and said, "Very well. You can look at the index for reference only. Do not remove anything." He led them down a narrow aisle between ledger shelves. They came to the cramped index cabinet behind the registry ledger shelves. Thomas moved with the careful gait of a man who carried the ledger habitually on his shoulder, counting steps to find needed volumes. He drew open the cabinet and ran his fingers across a row of bound index books. In one book he found a marginal note, an ink stroke that did not match the clerk's hand but used a code marked with a small caret and a number. Thomas paused. His hands trembled slightly. He had learned the registry's marginal language, abbreviations that indicated corrections, cross-references, and sometimes administrative notes that masked a decision. This notation pointed him to a separate bound index kept off the shelf, one not recorded on the public ledger. The room tightened around them. An event occurred that moved the plot outward. Thomas found the coded cross-reference and pulled a key from his satchel to fit a small lock on a hidden shelf. Behind the ledger shelves, Thomas opened a slim, bound index. He found names scraped from the public pages and written again here in a cramped hand. The entries had terse justifications: removed by order public health, evicted, not eligible for aid. Omitted, administration. The handwriting on these pages matched no clerk Thomas knew by routine. One line in particular stopped his breath. The entry had a surname he knew from his own street, one connected to a family he had watched from his window years ago. Deputy Clerk Evelyn hovered at his shoulder. She was a spare woman with thin hands and a habit of folding her fingers the way she folded forms. She had been the one to keep back copies of certain entries in secret. She made a low sound when Thomas' eyes lifted to her. Evelyn, Thomas, who wrote this? Evelyn's shoulders dropped as if weight had been placed on them. She whispered, not me, not at first. I started copying after I saw too many disappear. I cannot bear to let families lose their proof entirely. Her fingers shook as she offered him a folded page from under a faded cloth on a side desk. This was the first twist, a hidden ally. Thomas leaned forward and read the duplicate. Evelyn's voice was quiet and direct. They follow eviction lists, she said. They follow the health orders. If a house is marked, the names go next. It's not clerical error, Thomas. It's policy. Thomas tried to line the duplicated slip with Mrs. Larkin's reference. The ledger cross matched the coded carat Evelyn had shown him. Henry Larkin, he read aloud. He tasted metal in his mouth. What do you want me to do, Evelyn? Thomas. The question carried more than one meaning: legal duty, moral choice, immediate risk. Evelyn's reply arrived as a steady breath. Keep a copy, keep a note. Pass it quietly to those who ask. I have kept several, she the word several like a small, dangerous counting. They heard a soft footstep in the outer office. Hargrave's silhouette filled the doorway. He had been gone only a moment, but he returned with the messenger at his side. The messenger looked at Thomas with a thin smile. Hargrave spoke in a voice that did not try to hide authority. What have you been doing, Thomas? He stood with his hands on the ledger table, blocking the shelf. You should not be handling those indexes. You are an assistant clerk, not a keeper of private files. Thomas felt fear fold into him. He could name it. The fear of losing his position, of being given a quieter post, of having his brass watch taken from him and sent to a desk in another parish. But he also felt urgency. He shoved a folded duplicate into his satchel as his hand brushed the leather. Hargrave's reaction was immediate. He reached forward, and the two men collided at the shelf. The struggle was small and swift, a push at the shoulder, a hand on a wrist. The messenger moved to block Thomas, a rigid figure between the doorway and the ledger table. Thomas! Evelyn whispered sharply. Thomas, stop. Her warning came too late. He had already managed to slide a single page loose. There were 3 rapid exchanges then, brisk and jagged. Give it back, Hargrave ordered. No, Thomas, you will be ruined for this, Hargrave, and you will be exposed for it. Thomas replied, you think threats scare me. Hargrave snapped, you think exposure scares me, Thomas answered. The messenger stepped forward. Enough. Hargrave, close it up. We leave, he sounded like a man counting time. Hargrave looked at the messenger, then at Evelyn, then at Thomas. He chose the messenger. He backed away and, with a practiced motion, pulled the drawer closed and locked it. The room felt colder after the click of the lock. That moment served as the chapter's climax. Confrontation at the threshold with physical struggle, exposed motives, and a clear threat. Hargrave's threat was not idle. He named officials, he made hints of council pressure. He did not show the papers, but he described a network that ordered deletions from above. Thomas could have called for witnesses. He could have marched to the mayor's house with Evelyn's duplicate in his hand and demanded an explanation. Instead, he made a different choice, small, quiet, deliberate. Under Hargrave's eyes, Thomas signed a mandatory notation on a ledger page Evelyn slid out to him. He wrote the required inked phrase, the one that marked his compliance. He used his signature to mask another motion. With the other hand, he slid the peeled duplicate into a thin envelope and tucked it into his satchel. His motions were quick and precise. Mrs. Larkin waited outside the registry door, her hand still curled around the faded scrap. Thomas found her by the dim foyer lamplight. He handed her a folded paper without looking like a conspirator. She opened it and her face changed from fear to an abrupt, startled hope. Thomas, she breathed, this is Henry's name. Who gave this to you? Thomas kept his answer small. "A clerk with a steady hand," he said. He handed her a thread, an old brass button from his waistcoat, passed as a token of proof that someone had a copy. He did not say Evelyn's name aloud in the foyer. He did not promise more than what he could keep. Evelyn reappeared at the doorway with a look that mixed relief and sorrow. "Take care," she told Mrs. Larkin. "If anyone asks, say you found it among your things." She moved away before Mrs. Larkin could press her for details. The aftermath changed Thomas. The fear that had risen during the struggle calmed into a steady sorrow. He had saved one name. He had not stopped the system. He felt the moral cost like a weight on his ribs, tangible as the heavy wool coat he would later pull over his shoulders. On his walk home he paused under a single street lamp. Rain had left the cobbles smeared with oil, sheen reflections. He sat on a bench and took the duplicate from his satchel once more. He read the cramped lines, the neat surname, and the tiny administrative remark beside it. He fingered the ink as if it were a pulse. He thought of the ledger band he had seen earlier, the one rubbed into a pale shadow. He remembered the municipal messenger's impatience and Hargrave's warning about council men. He recalled the way Evelyn had folded her hands when she admitted she had kept copies. These concrete details assembled into a clearer picture. The removals followed eviction lists and public health edicts. They were coordinated, not accidental. An inner shift moved him from private guilt to purposeful planning. He did not feel heroic. He felt the practical clarity of a man deciding the smallest effective action. He would not publish the list. He would not shout from the square. He would do what he could without exposing Evelyn or inviting immediate reprisals. That night he made 3 small preparations. He fed the duplicate into a lockbox he kept beneath his bed, wrapped in oilcloth to keep the ink safe. He wrote a short note to Mrs. Larkin and left it folded in his satchel with a page showing a ledger folio and a caret mark. He memorized the coded sequence Evelyn had shown him and wrote it in the margin of his pocketbook in a shorthand he had used since his apprenticeship. The moral decision had concrete results. One family regained a record, one clerk continued to keep copies in secret, one official knew a man had resisted. Thomas' choices changed the immediate direction of more than one life. He passed his doorway and noticed a lamplighter finishing his rounds. The lamplighter's hands smelled of oil. Thomas walked past without speaking. He did not sleep well that night. In the days that followed, a small ripple spread. Mrs. Larkin came back to the registry with a copy in her pocket and showed the mayor a folded paper. She demanded a hearing. The mayor's secretary checked the ledger and found a discrepancy. Evelyn's covered copies proved crucial when an inquiry was reluctantly opened. Hargrave answered questions with smooth phrases about procedure and misfiled bundles. The messenger gave an account that shifted blame but named no names. The council issued a terse statement about record keeping and clerical oversight. It did not mention eviction lists or public health orders. It did not reveal the files in the hidden index. A second twist arrived when an auditor discovered a pattern in the back-bound index. Multiple names matched addresses listed in a set of eviction notices circulated 6 months earlier. The auditor read the same terse justifications and wrote a paper that traveled to town hall. The public inquiry did not purge the ledger overnight. Bureaucracy moved in long, stiff joints. But the inquiry forced Hargrave to answer specific questions in front of witnesses. When questioned about the sealed bundles, Hargrave admitted a bundle had been received from a municipal department but insisted its contents were confidential and required immediate action for the public good. His answer sounded practiced. His face showed a thin bead of sweat. Thomas attended the inquiry. He sat near the back, hands folded around his gloves. He did not speak much. He listened. Evelyn gave her account in clipped sentences, and she did so with a voice that had lost some of its earlier tremor. Mrs. Larkin testified with a voice that shook but did not break. The inquiry's outcome was mixed. Hargrave was reprimanded and moved to a desk with fewer responsibilities. The messenger was reassigned. The council promised new oversight measures and a review of the process that allowed names to be removed. They announced a plan to publish a summary of changes made for public health reasons. None of that returned every lost line to the public ledger. Some names remained removed. Some families never learned why. Thomas kept his duplicate in his lockbox and added another folded page to his satchel, a small list of names he had begun to collect in secret. The emotional arc changed slowly through these events. Suspicion opened the chapter. Defiance followed at the confrontation. Fear flared during the struggle. Then a pragmatic resolve settled in his choices, and a wary hope lived in the quiet acts of copying and passing papers. Months later, a woman from the council office asked Thomas to come to a meeting. She spoke with official phrase and a careful hand. "We need someone who knows the indexes," she said. "We need someone methodical." The offer was a thin reward for the risk he had taken, and it carried a danger of further exposure. Thomas considered it. He thought of Evelyn's small courage, Mrs. Larkin's gratitude, and the ledger's battered leather spine. He accepted on one condition. Evelyn would transfer her copied pages into the temporary safe they had arranged at a friend's law office, and no one would be named publicly who might be harmed. The woman from the council agreed, and the arrangement moved forward in small, sensible steps. A list catalogued here, a review conducted there. That final decision closed the urgent conflict in its immediate form. Hargrave's network remained larger than the municipal office alone, but the records now had witnesses beyond a single drawer. The choice Thomas made, the quiet saving of a page, the token given to a mother, had concrete consequences for at least a handful of people. On the last night of the official review, Thomas walked home with a duplicate in his coat pocket and a lightweight satisfaction he did not expect. He thought of the ledger of Evelyn, of Mrs. Larkin clutching her son's name like a small, living thing. He had not undone the whole system. He had changed one small record and, by doing so, forced a partial reckoning. He closed his front door and placed the duplicate into the lockbox beneath his bed. He set the brass key beside it on the floor, then sat at his little kitchen table. He opened his palm and looked at his ink-stained fingertips. He felt tired at the joints and older than the years on his brass watch. He folded a short note for Evelyn and slid it into an envelope. He did not sign the note with his full name. He left only the initials of the clerk who had once kept children in the registry and who now kept pages against forgetting. Outside, the lamplight hummed. Inside, Thomas zipped his satchel, buttoned his coat, and wrapped the wool around his shoulders. He took the small brass button he had given Mrs. Larkin back out and held it in his palm for a moment, as if to confirm it had been handed and was still there in memory. He stepped into the street and felt the chill at his face. He walked away from the registry with the duplicate safe for now, and with the knowledge that one name had a living witness. He folded the satchel strap across his chest, tightened the clasp, and in the pool of a lamplight outside his door he closed the satchel and walked off down the cobbled road with the duplicate secured inside his bag as the lamp flicked once and steadied.